Arthur Penhaligon sat on a bench that didn't quite fit his hips, clutching a thermos of tea that was, by all accounts, the only civilized thing left in the known galaxy. Above him, the sky was a perfect, heartbreaking shade of London grey. A masterpiece of atmospheric engineering within the new Kew Gardens sector of Londonium Prime. Artificial mist clung to the leaves of synthetic oaks, and the air smelled of damp earth and rotting leaves, a scent that most species on the station classified as hazardous biological decay, but which Arthur simply called home. HFY, a crystalline being whose internal structure vibrated with every step Arthur took, stood exactly 1.5 meters behind him. HFY was a liaison of the High Protectorate, specifically assigned to ensure that the elder Deathworlder did not accidentally cause a planetary collapse by sneezing or, heaven forbid, engaging in gardening. To HFY, Arthur was a terrifying enigma. The human was 62 years old, which was ancient for his kind, yet he moved with a terrifying, heavy deliberateness. Each footstep Arthur took on the cobbled path hit with the force of 1.2 Earth gravities, a setting specifically chosen by the station's engineers to suppress the rapid growth of Terran roses, but which Arthur treated like a brisk morning in Surrey. "It's a bit thin, HFY," Arthur remarked, unscrewing the lid of his thermos. The steam rose in a gentle curl, catching the artificial sunlight. HFY-4's sensors spiked. To a creature made of delicate, low-gravity crystals, that steam was a cloud of thermal energy and aerosolized stimulants. "Mr. Penhaligon," HFY chimed, his voice sounding like bells underwater, "the atmospheric sensors are flagging your beverage as a Class 8 volatile organic compound. I must ask you to seal the container. The Pelathai in the next sector are already complaining of lightheadedness from the bergamot fumes." Arthur took a long, slow sip, closing his eyes. "Bergamot, lad. It's Earl Grey. It's meant to be smelled. If the Pelathai can't handle a bit of citrus, they shouldn't have invited a gardener to their station." Characters in this section: 2,154 total characters. 2,154. Arthur's hand was steady, despite the liver spots and the faint tremor of age. To HFY-4, that hand was a weapon of terrifying complexity. He had seen the files. Human anatomy was a nightmare of redundant systems and dense calcium structures. They had survived 8.7 million competing species on a planet that actively tried to kill them every time it rained. And here was Arthur, a man who spent his life coaxing life out of the dirt, looking as though he hadn't a care in the world. "You are staring again, HFY," Arthur said, not opening his eyes. "It's impolite to gawk at a man while he's having his elevenses." "I am monitoring for safety." HFY-4 vibrated. "The High Inquisitor Vrax is currently reviewing your permit for the rose pruning. He is skeptical. He believes the metal implement you call clippers is a disguised sonic disruptor." Arthur chuckled, a dry, wheezing sound that made HFY-4's crystalline facets shiver. "Clippers? Bless him. If I wanted to disrupt something, I wouldn't need a pair of rusty shears. I'd just start whistling." High Inquisitor Vrax, however, was not laughing. In the surveillance hub overlooking the new Q sector, Vrax's sensory plumes were fully extended, detecting contentment. To Vrax, human contentment was the most dangerous signal in the galaxy. Aggression could be predicted. Rage could be countered. But contentment? Contentment meant the predator was so confident in its surroundings that it had ceased to perceive anything as a threat. "Look at him," Vrax hissed to his subordinates. Vrax was an avian-reptilian hybrid, built for speed and high-altitude strikes. His bones were hollow, his skin a mesh of light sensors. He is sitting in a zone where the gravity would crush a Korvax cadet, drinking a liquid that is currently melting the internal lining of his own throat, and he is smiling. "Sir," a technician whispered, "we've analyzed the tea. It contains high levels of caffeine and tannins. In a human, it acts as a mild stimulant. In our species, it would cause immediate heart failure and permanent neurological damage. He's recreationalizing poison." Vrax narrowed his eyes. "And the stick? The wooden one?" "Oak, sir. Extremely dense. It's been treated with oils to prevent decay. He uses it to lean on, but our simulations show that if he swung it with his baseline muscular density, it would have the kinetic impact of a Class 9 breaching ram." Characters in this section: 2,410 total characters. 4,564. Arthur finished his tea and stood up. The sound of his knees popping, a simple click-clack of aging joints, sent a shockwave through the audio sensors in the hub. Seismic event detected, an automated voice announced. No, Vrax groaned, clutching his sensory plumes. That was just his legs. He's moving. Alert the intercept team. He's heading toward the restricted sector. The restricted sector was, in fact, the Queen Elizabeth II Memorial Rosebush. It was the pride of Arthur's botanical collection and the terror of the station's safety board. The roses were a special breed from Earth, known for being hardy. In the 1.2G environment of Londonium Prime, they had grown thick, woody stems and thorns the size of a Corvax's talons. The station's xenobiologists had classified the garden as a passive-aggressive biological trap. Arthur walked toward the gate, his walking stick tapping rhythmically on the cobbles. Tap, tap, tap. Texwell, for it sounded like a countdown. Mr. Penhaligon, the gate is locked. Exwell cried out, his crystals turning a panicked shade of violet. The Inquisitor has revoked access until the Clippers have been dematerialized for safety testing. Arthur reached the heavy reinforced steel gate. It was designed to withstand a hull breach. He looked at the electronic lock, then at the handle. He didn't even look at the keypad. Locked, you say? Arthur muttered, his brow furrowing in that particular English way that suggests a mild inconvenience is about to be dealt with. Probably just a bit of rust. These station doors never did have much character. He gripped the handle. His forearm muscles shifted beneath his tweed sleeve. Not the bulging muscles of a warrior, but the lean corded strength of a man who had spent 40 years digging trenches in the heavy clay of Surrey. He gave the handle a firm downward tug. The sound of the internal locking pins shearing was like a gunshot. The steel groaned, the reinforced frame buckled by less than a millimeter, and the door swung open with a pathetic squeak. There we are, Arthur said, stepping into the garden. Just needed a bit of elbow grease. In the surveillance hub, Vrax watched the unbreakable lock status turn to critical failure. He didn't even use a tool, Vrax whispered, his plumes wilting in shock. He just thought the door was stuck. Characters in this section, 2,388 total characters. 6,952. The rose garden was a riot of deep crimson and emerald green. The mist was thicker here, swirling around Arthur's ankles like a living thing. He moved among the bushes, his weathered hands reaching out to touch the stems. Exwell hovered at the threshold, refusing to enter. Sir, the thorns. The scanner says they are coated in Terran bacteria, and have a sharpness rating of 4.2 on the galactic piercing scale. You are touching them with your bare skin. Arthur didn't look back. He was gently guiding a stray branch back toward the trellis. A thorn sharp enough to puncture a pressurized suit scraped against his thumb, drawing a tiny bead of bright red blood. Arthur didn't flinch. He didn't even notice. He simply wiped the blood onto his tweed waistcoat and continued his work. Blood volume loss detected. Exwell whimpered. Initiating medical emergency protocol. Quiet, lad, Arthur grumbled. It's just a scratch. Roses are like people. They need to know you're not afraid of them before they'll show you their best. To the aliens watching, this was a display of utter madness. The high-hazard flora were actively stabbing the human, and he was comforting them. He's bonding with the biological weapons, Vrax muttered into his comms. Intercept team, move in now. Do not engage in melee. Use the Class 5 neuroinhibitor gas. We need to neutralize him before he convinces the roses to breach the hull. Suddenly, the vents in the garden ceiling hissed. A thick purple gas began to pour into the dome. It was a potent sedative designed to knock out a herd of Pelathi in seconds. Arthur paused, sniffing the air. Ooh, hello. Is that a leak in the ventilation? Smells a bit like lavender, actually. Quite soothing. He didn't fall. He didn't even stagger. On Earth, Arthur had spent decades breathing in pollen, smog, and the concentrated fumes of industrial-strength fertilizer. His lungs, forged in the death-world atmosphere of 21st century London, barely recognized the neuroinhibitor as anything more than a pleasant fragrance. XYL, do you smell that? Arthur asked, looking around. Reminds me of my grandmother's parlor. Though it's a bit thick for a public space, don't you think? XYL didn't answer. He had already gone into safety lockdown. his crystals darkening to black to protect his internal matrix from the gas. Characters in this section: 2,455 total characters. 9,407. Vrax's intercept team burst through the broken gate. There were 6 of them, all encased in high-mobility exoskeletons that hummed with kinetic energy. They carried stun pikes, rods that could deliver enough voltage to stop a heart. Arthur turned around, his clippers in one hand and his walking stick in the other. He looked at the armored figures with the mild, patient annoyance of a man interrupted while weeding. "Now then," Arthur said, his voice echoing in the mist. "I don't recall seeing you boys on the gardening roster. And you're trampling the mulch. That's premium compost, that is." "Arthur Penhaligon." Vrax's voice boomed over the garden speakers. "Drop the Class 12 melee implement and the shearing device. You are in violation of Station Protocol 9, Biological Menace in a high-G zone." Arthur looked at his walking stick. He looked at his clippers. Then he looked at the nearest armored guard, a young Korvax whose exoskeleton was vibrating with nervous energy. "Protocol 9? Arthur repeated. "Listen, son, I've been following protocol since before your planet learned how to make fire. But there's a higher protocol here, and that's the Queen's Rose. She needs a trim, and I'm the only one who knows how to do it without killing the bloom." The lead guard lunged. It was a textbook move, a high-speed dash designed to pin a target to the ground. Arthur didn't move fast. He didn't need to. He simply shifted his weight. To the Korvax, it was like trying to tackle a mountain. Arthur's center of gravity was so low, his bone density so high, that the guard simply bounced off him. But Arthur, ever the gentleman, reached out a hand to steady the falling guard. He grabbed the guard's armored shoulder joint, the one place where the silicon reinforcement had to be flexible. Creak. The sound of the high-tensile alloy bending under Arthur's gentle grip was sickening. "Steady on, lad," Arthur said, his voice genuinely concerned. "You almost had a nasty fall there. These cobbles can be quite slippery when they're damp." The guard looked up into Arthur's calm, blue eyes and immediately triggered his suit's emergency armor lock protocol. He wasn't even injured, but his lizard brain had recognized a predator that didn't even know it was hunting. Characters in this section: 2,422 total characters. 11,829. The other 5 guards froze. They had been trained for war, for tactical strikes against pirates and insurgents. They had not been trained for a polite elderly man who broke power armor while trying to be helpful. In the hub, Vrax was screaming, "What are you doing? Attack! Use the pikes!" The guards moved in unison, a circle of stun pikes closing in on Arthur. The air crackled with electricity. Arthur sighed. "Well, if we're going to be silly about it." He didn't swing his stick. Instead, he simply used it as a lever. He jammed the wooden end of the stick into the ground between 2 guards and leaned his full weight onto it. On Earth, Arthur weighed about 180 pounds. In the 1.2G environment of the station, his effective mass was over 200 pounds, backed by the biological leverage of a species that evolved to carry its own weight through trees and across mountains. The cobblestones, synthetic tiles designed to withstand heavy machinery, cracked. The stick acted as a fulcrum, and with a simple twist of his torso, Arthur funneled the guard's own momentum. 2 guards collided. Their exoskeletons sparked as their safety systems jammed. Arthur stepped through the gap, moving with a surprising fluid grace. He wasn't using a martial art. He was using the same movements he used to turn a heavy compost heap. "Pardon me," Arthur said, stepping past the 3rd guard. "Excuse me," he added, gently nudging the 4th with his elbow. The 4th guard flew 3 meters into a rose bush. Within 30 seconds, the elite intercept team was a jumble of locked armor and confused aliens. None of them were seriously hurt. Arthur had been careful not to muck about with their soft parts, but their pride was non-existent. Arthur walked back to his bench, sat down, and picked up a small rectangular object wrapped in silver foil. "Right then," he said to the pile of armored bodies. "That was a bit of a workout. Time for a biscuit." He unwrapped a shortbread finger. Characters in this section: 2,192 total characters. 14,021. The silence that followed was heavy. HFY, whose crystals had finally cleared, watched Arthur take a bite of the shortbread. The crunch was audible over the intercom. Inquisitor, HFY whispered. The human is eating a class 12 caloric brick. He is replenishing his energy reserves. In the hub, Vrax sat slumped in his chair. He watched Arthur finish the biscuit, wipe the crumbs from his tweed waistcoat, and then calmly go back to the rose bush to finish his pruning. Sir? The technician asked. Should we send in the heavy infantry? The ones with the plasma shields. Vrax looked at the screen. He saw Arthur talking to the roses, his voice a low, soothing hum. He saw the way the human didn't even look at the guards as they scrambled to their feet and beat a hasty retreat. No, Vrax said, his plumes sagging. If we send in the heavy infantry, he might think we're bringing him a lawnmower, and he'll end up accidentally deconstructing the entire station trying to find the spark plug. Vrax stood up and began typing. Record the following for the High Protectorate. Subject: Arthur Penhaligon. Classification: Biological singularity. Recommendation: Immediate implementation of the Covent Garden Protocol. The what, sir? The Covent Garden Protocol, Vrax snapped. From now on, the human is to be treated as a sovereign territory. The floor of the lift felt heavier not because of the gravity, but because of the sheer weight of the man standing on it. Characters in this section: 2,248 total characters. 20,789 the weeks passed, and the Covent Garden Protocol became a staple of station life. Arthur, despite being a biological anomaly that terrified the administration, had become something of a local legend. He didn't just prune the roses, he started a vegetable patch. Mr. Penhaligon, HFY said one afternoon, watching Arthur dig into a tray of sustenance class 4, which Arthur had insisted was actually just decent potting soil. The High Inquisitor Vrax wishes to speak with you. He is in a state of spiritual crisis. Vrax was waiting in the green zone, sitting on the very bench where the incident had begun. He looked older, his plumes frayed and his light sensors dimmed. He was no longer wearing his ceremonial armor. He wore a simple, unadorned tunic. Arthur sat down next to him, placing his thermos between them. Rough day at the office, Inquisitor? Vrax looked at the human. I have spent my life studying threat assessments. I have categorized every predator from the Maw of Zeta to the Voidwalkers of Krell. And then I met you. Arthur unscrewed the thermos. The scent of Earl Grey filled the air. Vrax didn't flinch this time. He simply breathed it in, his plumes quivering. You are not a warrior, Vrax continued, his voice low. You do not seek glory. You do not even seek to dominate. And yet, you defeated my finest team without breaking your contentment. How? Arthur poured a cup of tea and handed it to Vrax. The Inquisitor stared at the porcelain cup as if it were an unexploded bomb. Take it, man. It won't bite, Arthur said. Vrax took a sip. His eyes widened. The heat, the bitterness, the sudden rush of caffeine. It was like a lightning bolt to his nervous system. He coughed, his chest heaving, but he didn't stop drinking. It's the environment, Vrax, Arthur said softly. You look at Earth and you see a death world. You see 8.7 million species fighting for a scrap of dirt. But you're missing the point. We didn't survive Earth by being the meanest. We survived it by being the most stubborn. We survived it by finding beauty in the middle of the mess. Characters in this section: 2,305 total characters. 23,094 Vrax finished the tea, his sensory plumes glowing with a strange, frantic light. Stubbornness. To find beauty, while the world tries to kill you. Exactly, Arthur said, leaning back. You see a rose and you see thorns. You see hazardous flora. I see a rose and I see a bloom that worked very hard to grow in the cold. I respect that. And I'm willing to be a bit dangerous to make sure it keeps blooming. Vrax looked at the garden. For the first time, he didn't see a passive-aggressive biological trap. He saw the deep, vibrant red of the petals. He saw the way they leaned toward the artificial sun. He saw the care in every pruned leaf. I have spent my life afraid of everything that wasn't under my control, Vrax said. I thought control was safety. But you have no control and you are safer than anyone I know. Control is a myth, son, Arthur said, patting Vrax on the shoulder. The Inquisitor's hollow bones rattled under the weight of Arthur's hand, but he didn't pull away. You can't control the weather, you can't control the roses, and you certainly can't control humans. All you can do is keep your kettle full and your boots clean. The two of them sat in silence for a long time. An alien inquisitor and an English gardener, sharing a bench in a fake London park on the edge of the galaxy. HFY, watching from a distance, recorded the data. He didn't send it to the Protectorate. He didn't file it as a threat assessment. Instead, he labeled it under a new category he had created: humanity. The philosophy of tea. As the artificial sun began to dim, signifying the station's evening, Arthur stood up. He picked up his stick and his empty thermos. "Well, Vrax, it's been a pleasure, but I've got to get back. There's a rerun of a show called Gardener's World on the old archives, and I've got a packet of hobnobs calling my name." Vrax stood up and bowed. Not a bow of submission, but a bow of genuine respect. "Good evening, Mr. Penhaligon. May your hobnobs be ever plentiful." Characters in this section: 2,345 total characters. 25,439. Arthur walked away, his stick tapping against the cobbles. Tap, tap, tap. The sound no longer felt like a countdown to HFY. It felt like a heartbeat. The heartbeat of a species that had looked at the most hostile planet in the galaxy and decided to build a garden on it. As Arthur reached the exit, he stopped and turned to HFY. "You know, XYL, I've been thinking. That rose bush in the corner? It's a bit lonely. I think we need some lavender to go with it. And maybe some mint. The Pelathi will hate the smell, but it'll do wonders for the tea." XYL4's crystals glowed a warm, steady blue. "I will inform the administration, Mr. Penhaligon. I suspect they will agree to anything, provided you do not adjust any more doors." Arthur laughed, a hearty, warm sound that filled the dome. "No promises, lad. No promises." He stepped out into the corridor, and for a brief moment, the gravity of the station seemed to lift. Not because of a mechanical failure, but because the presence of the man had moved on, taking his Deathworlder weight with him. 3 months later, the Covent Garden Protocol had expanded. Londonium Prime was no longer just a sterile trade hub. It was the only station in the quadrant with a thriving, fragrant, and terrifying English garden. High Inquisitor Vrax had retired from security. He was now Arthur's apprentice. He was still terrible at pruning. His hollow bones were too fragile for the heavy shears, but he had become a master at the tea ceremony. Rule 22C was still in effect, but the plaque near the garden entrance had been changed. It no longer read, "High Hazard Zone." Instead it read, "The new Kew Gardens. Please stay 2 meters away from the gardener while he is eating." Not because he is a threat, but because he is enjoying his lunch, and that is a sacred thing. Beneath the plaque, someone, perhaps a Korvax cadet who had finally read the file, had left a small, hand-carved wooden robin. Characters in this section: 2,130 total characters. 27,569. The transformation of Londonium Prime continued in ways that the High Protectorate could never have anticipated. It wasn't just the garden. It was the human effect. Humans, it turned out, were infectious. Not with viruses, though their biology was a petri dish of death-world organisms, but with their attitude. Arthur's stubborn contentment began to leak out of the green zone. The Pelathi, who were usually the most nervous species on the station, began to adopt the habit of afternoon breaks. They found that sitting in the vicinity of Arthur, even at a safe distance of 5 meters, lowered their stress responses. The telepathic Dorvathy stopped bleeding from the nose. The Deathworlder signal from Arthur wasn't a roar of aggression anymore, but a steady low-frequency hum of "everything is all right." But the true test of the Covent Garden Protocol came during the Great Power Surge of 51. The station's main reactor, a complex crystalline matrix from a low-G star system, suffered a catastrophic feedback loop. The gravity generators flickered, the lights died, and the life support systems began to groan. Panic, the one thing more dangerous than a human on a space station, began to spread like wildfire. XY4 found Arthur in his quarters. The human was sitting in the dark, his tea kettle whistling on the gas stove, the only appliance on the station not tied to the main power grid. "Mr. Penhaligon," XY4 chimed, his facets flashing red. "The reactor is failing. The Korvax are abandoning the lower decks." We must head to the escape pods. Arthur didn't move. He poured the boiling water into his teapot with practiced precision. Sit down, Exwell. You're vibrating so hard you're going to crack your own facets. But the station is dying. The station is having a bit of a wobble, Arthur corrected. Escape pods are for people who haven't got anything better to do. Now sit. We're going to wait for the kettle to steep. Characters in this section. 2,215 total characters. 29,784 Exwell sat. He had no choice. The gravity was fluctuating wildly. One moment he felt light as a feather. The next he was pinned to the floor. But Arthur sat as if the laws of physics were merely suggestions. His death world physiology, built for the crushing weight and unpredictable storms of Earth, barely registered the station's instability. Why are you so calm? Exwell asked, his voice trembling. Because lad, panic is like a bad frost. It kills the tender bits before the real winter even arrives, Arthur said, sliding a cup of tea across the table. I've seen power cuts before. In '78 we didn't have lights for a week. We just lit some candles and got on with it. In the surveillance hub, which was running on emergency batteries, Vrax watched the station-wide panic on his monitors. He saw species trampling each other in the corridors. He saw the elite teams losing their hierarchy. And then, he looked at the feed from Arthur's quarters. The human was drinking tea. In the dark, Vrax took a deep breath, his plumes settling. He opened the station-wide intercom. This is High Inquisitor Vrax, he announced, his voice steady. To all species, look at the human in Sector 4. Arthur Penhaligon is currently having his tea. He is not running. He is not screaming. If a creature from the most dangerous planet in the galaxy thinks it's time for a break, then so do we. Return to your stations. The engineers will have the power back shortly. The effect was instantaneous. Across the station, thousands of aliens stopped. They looked at the monitors. They saw the silver-haired man calmly blowing on his tea. The collective telepathic static of 70,000 minds shifted from frantic fear to a stunned, curious quiet. The human signal had acted as a biological anchor. Characters in this section. 2,150 total characters. 31,934 The engineers, seeing the panic subside, were able to focus. Without the chaos in the corridors, they reached the reactor core in record time. The surge was contained. The gravity stabilized. The lights flickered back to life, glowing with the soft, warm hue that Arthur had requested for the green zone. When the power returned, Exwell looked at Arthur. The human hadn't even finished his cup. You saved them, Exwell whispered. Your contentment. It was a weapon. You used it to stop the panic. Arthur set his cup down and smiled. Weapon? No, Exwell. It's just common sense. You can't fix a reactor while you're running for the door, can you? Now, I believe there's a bit of shortbread left. Would you like a piece? The aftermath of the power surge changed the station's hierarchy forever. The High Protectorate sent a delegation to Londonium Prime, expecting to find a disaster. Instead, they found a station that was strangely peaceful. The delegation was led by a Korvax general named Cal Thor, a veteran of 100 planetary conquests. He marched into the green zone, his heavy exoskeleton clanking against the cobbles. He intended to arrest the human for illegal interference with interspecies psychology. He found Arthur in the Rose Garden, teaching Vrax how to graft a new stem. Arthur Penhaligon, the general roared. You are accused of using unauthorized biological signals to influence the station's population. You have compromised the martial readiness of the Korvax cadets. Arthur didn't even look up from the rose bush. You're shouting, General. It's bad for the blooms. They can feel the vibrations, you know. Calthor stomped toward him. I am not here for blooms. I am here for justice. Arthur stood up slowly. He wiped his hands on his apron and picked up his walking stick. He walked toward the general until he was standing just inches from the massive silicon-reinforced chest plate. Characters in this section. 2,280 total characters. 34,214 The general looked down at the human. Arthur was small, his skin was thin, and his hair was white. To the general, he should have looked like a piece of dry tinder. But Arthur didn't look up with fear. He looked up with a clinical diagnostic interest. That's a nasty squeak in your left knee joint, General, Arthur said, pointing his stick at the exoskeleton. Sand in the bearings, I'd wager. You shouldn't let it go like that. It'll seize up on you when you least expect it. The general blinked. His martial rage hit a brick wall of grandmotherly concern. My bearings? Here, let me see, Arthur said. Before the general could react, the human reached out and gripped the unbreakable armor joint. Creak. Arthur gave the joint a sharp, precise tug. A small piece of grit fell out. The squeak vanished. There. Much better, Arthur said, stepping back. Now, what was it you were saying about justice? I hope it's not going to take long. I've got to get these seedlings in before the sunset cycle. General Calthor stood frozen. His armor, his pride, had just been serviced by a creature that treated him like a broken lawnmower. He looked at his hand, then at the human, then at Vrax, who was calmly sipping tea in the background. He fixed me, the general whispered. He does that, Vrax replied, not looking up from his cup. It's a Class 12 threat, General. He'll fix everything until nothing works the way you expect it to anymore. The general didn't arrest Arthur. He couldn't. How do you arrest a man who fixes your knees? Instead, he did something that shocked the entire protectorate. He sat down. Characters in this section, 2,120 total characters. 36,334. The incident with the general was the final nail in the coffin of the old regime. Londonium Prime became the unofficial capital of a new kind of diplomacy, one based not on trade agreements or military pacts, but on the garden philosophy. As the years rolled on, Arthur Penhaligon remained the center of it all. He never grew younger, and his movements became even slower, but his weight on the station only increased. He had become a living monument. One evening, Arthur sat on his favorite bench, looking out at the stars through the dome of the rose garden. Exwelfer sat beside him, his crystals now a permanent, peaceful shade of lavender. Exwell, Arthur said, his voice a soft rasp. I think it's almost time. Time for tea, Mr. Penhaligon? No, lad. Time for a long sleep. The garden is doing well. Vrax knows how to handle the aphids, and the general has finally stopped shouting at the tulips. My work here is done. Exwelfer felt a strange vibration in his matrix, a sense of loss that his cultural database didn't have a name for. You are leaving? I'm an old gardener, Exwell, and every garden has its season. I've had a very long summer. Arthur leaned back, his eyes closing. He looked at peace. He looked content. Will you be afraid? Exwelfer asked. Arthur smiled, a faint, beautiful crinkling of his face. Afraid? No, lad. I'm just going to see if they've got any decent Earl Grey on the other side. And if not, well, I'll just have to plant some, won't I? Arthur Penhaligon passed away that night, sitting in his garden, his hand resting on his wooden stick. The station didn't go quiet. It never goes quiet with 17 species, but the texture of the noise changed. The floor felt lighter, like gravity had finally lifted its weight. But the Covent Garden Protocol remained. Rule 22C was never repealed. And every year on the anniversary of the Great Power Surge, every species on Londonium Prime, from the armored Korvax to the crystalline XYL, stops what they are doing. They sit. They pour a cup of tea. And for exactly 15 minutes they are content. Zit with circumflex U twin sang Toa with tilde Honda with graven H characters in this section. 2,250 total characters. 38,584.